everyone, Coach Kyle here again. I haven't really talked about psychedelics yet on the YouTube channel, and I think it's about time we do that. So we're going to talk about psychedelics a little bit today. What I really want to talk about is at a high level, you know, there's a lot of hype, a lot of excitement around psychedelics right now. And when you look at the research that's happening and the significance of the results we're seeing with a lot of things, that excitement is warranted, and we should be excited because this has great potential to kind of reshape mental health in the world today and how we treat mental health issues. But the point I really want to get across today is that psychedelics are not a cure. They're not a cure-all. They're not fixing something that's broken or something that's not working correctly. As we typically think of many other drugs, it's correcting an imbalance, it's repairing something, it's giving us something that should be there that we're not, manufacturing on our own or absorbing to whatever. Psychedelics aren't working in that way. It's not fixing anything. At a very high level, what I'll describe it as is psychedelics are a catalyst for change. All right, we'll get into what I mean by that in a moment. But first, I want to clarify, when I use the word psychedelics, there's many different kind of drugs that fall into that category. So primarily what I'm talking about is what's known as the classic psychedelics. So these are the substances that work by, they bind with chemical receptors in the brain known as serotonin 2A receptors. So they create chemical molecules that, closely resemble the geometry of serotonin. It's not serotonin itself, but they're close enough. They bind to these receptors very specifically. They don't bind to any other receptors in the brain. So classic psychedelics are things like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, mescaline. I might be missing one, but because they all work in the same way. And this is where much of the research is being centered around. One other drug commonly being researched and used right now is also MDMA. Street name, Molly or ecstasy. It also affects the serotonin 2A receptors in the same way, but it also, in addition to that, it also binds with dopamine receptors and norepinephrine receptors in the brain. So it's doing a little more, and it yields a much different experience, and it's being used in different ways in therapeutic settings, but we're seeing a lot of the same results. Another commonly used one, being used more in practice, but not so much in research, is ketamine, because it's, of a totally different legal status because it's used for other things medically. It's also used as anesthetic. So at higher doses, it, knocks you out unconscious. But at the right dose, it can yield, a comparably psychedelic-like experience. But it's working in totally different ways in the brain. So we're not really talking about that here. All right. So anyway, under the influence of psychedelics, what happens in the brain? And we've seen this on fMRI scans. It's like the whole brain starts lighting up. Most of it just, lights up like a Christmas tree. So normally our brains are very compartmentalized. You have a vision center, a hearing center, different regions of the brain that are kind of dedicated to specific purposes, specific tasks. Normally speaking, these regions don't talk to each other any more than they have to. They're like co-workers that, tolerate one another, but they don't necessarily hang out after work, right? They don't talk to each other any more than they have to. So when we ingest psychedelic substances, it creates a phenomenon known as global communication or global connectivity. So all these regions start communicating to each other like way more than usual. And that explains some of the unique experiences that psychedelics can create, where maybe our senses are getting mixed up in ways like we can hear colors or we can taste sounds suddenly, and that's a direct result of that cross communication that normally isn't happening. Now, consider this, that cross communication is happening through new connections between neurons in the brain. So the brain is very much being rewired during a psychedelic experience. Neurons are making new connections that they weren't making before. Um, and going back to my original statement of how the psychedelics are beneficial, they're a catalyst for change. Okay. So when we talk about change, if I want to change anything, if I want to change my behavior, if I want to change my patterns of thinking, my patterns of emotion, that has to happen through something called neuroplasticity. And that's a fancy word to describe the ability of our brains to rewire itself. Every new thing you learn, every new experience you have, creates new connection between neurons in your brain, rearranges those neurons, um, even can create new neurons and snip, unused ones. The brain is very dynamic. So this old idea of, you have a limited number of brain cells and, if you lose those, you never get them back is totally wrong and misleading. Our brains are very dynamic and changing all the time. So as you can imagine, you taking a psychedelic substance, all these new connections are happening in the brain. It's all this, global communication happening. And that phenomenon actually persists for a time after that experience. So for a number of weeks, there is remaining this increased level of global connectivity. Um, and this creates an environment of increased neuroplasticity. You have all these new connections made, and you could, with intent, and this is where the integration work comes in. If you do the work, you can more easily bring about change in your life. You can more easily change your patterns of thought, emotion, behavior. Okay. Because you have all these new connections that have been made suddenly, and they're not really assigned to a specific task yet. So if you took psychedelics and you did none of the integration work, you didn't do any of the work to make change happen, those unused connections are going to sever apart again. And, your brain's essentially going to go back to the way it was. So when we look at the types of issues that psychedelics are proving to be hugely beneficial for, they are mental health concerns that are not, chemical imbalances or structural problems in the brain. They're not genetic differences necessarily. They're direct results of patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. So something like depression, anxiety, addiction, these are all kind of experiences generated by certain patterns of these three aspects and the way in which they come together. And if I want to change those, I've got to rewire my brain. So, an analogy I like to use sometimes is, you take two individuals, and they're each going to train to run a marathon. Okay. Now, person A over here, they're not so well off. They don't have a lot of extra money. They don't have a lot of extra time to train. So they're going to train just by putting on their ratty old tennis shoes and getting out there and hitting the pavement and running. Now, this person can absolutely train for a marathon. They can excel at that and even be great at it through just hard work and practice. Now, person B over here has every advantage. Let's say, they were born into wealth, and they're going to go out right away and buy, the highest tech running shoes they can. They have access to, you know, any type of gym they want. They're going to hire a running coach. They're going to hire a nutritional coach. They're going to hire a motivational coach. So they have kind of every advantage going into that process of training or change. But they still have to go do the work, right? It's not like a shortcut. It's not like we're taking a different path. We're just getting a lot more support along the way. So if this person doesn't go out and do the running, they're not going to be able to achieve the same goal. Now, this is kind of like how psychedelics are helpful. They're giving you every advantage in the journey of change, but you still have to do the work. You still have to make the change happen. But it can be a whole lot easier and even get you there a little faster. So again, psychedelics are not a cure. They're not fixing anything, but they're a catalyst for change. And the path out of most of these mental health issues is via change. And change is always hard. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you're trying to change. Change is always hard. And that's where psychedelics can be hugely beneficial, especially for things that are very hard to change or where there's a lot of roadblocks in making those changes. So another aspect of this, I think, and this is far less understood scientifically, but the experience you have under the influence of psychedelics itself, I think, plays a role in this as well. So we don't even really understand why there's so much similarity between psychedelic experiences. Every experience is unique, every experience is different, but there are commonalities. So kind of generally put, it's almost like a psychedelic experience can give you a glimpse of how good things could be. It shows you, it gives you the experience of it, of making it, getting to this point of happiness, of joy, of euphoria. But it also, with that experience, the more challenging aspects of it, it shows you what's in your way. It reveals to you what your roadblocks are, and it shows you, this is what you need to work through to get to this point. And it tends to reveal your issues, your deep-seated issues to you, and kind of rub your nose in it a little bit, but in a kind and gentle way, typically. Not that, most psychedelic experiences come with, great challenges. It's not like all a fun and happy time. There are aspects of that. But so in this interesting way, it kind of gives you every advantage on the path of change, but also kind of reveals to you in a lot of ways what that path needs to be. Where are the major milestones for you along that path of change? And as I said, this is far less understood scientifically why this happens, but it's really interesting. And I think it's, a lot of times people come out of that experience with a whole lot of motivation to change because, again, it's kind of showed you what's possible. So along with the increase in neuroplasticity, you come out with a greatly increased level of motivation to do something about it. But again, the work is still the same. You've got to go do it. You've got to do that integration work. So that's my spiel on psychedelics for now. Kind of the way I help people around psychedelics is, not all of us are willing or even see it as an option to wait until psychedelics are readily available in a clinical setting. That's still going to be several years down the road, if not longer, to where we can go to our family doctor and, be prescribed a psychedelic assisted kind of therapy to help with our issues. And some of us might not feel like waiting that long is even possible. So there are a growing number of people who are seeing the benefits that these substances can yield, and they're not willing to wait, and they're making that decision to pursue it on their own, to self-treat, if you will. So my goal is to help those folks, you know, who have made that decision already. I would never push anybody to doing this on their own. But to help those people who already have made that choice to do it safely, to maximize their chances of having a positive experience, and then helping people to do the integration work following that experience to make that change happen, right? To capitalize on every advantage you've been given by psychedelics to make change happen. So that's kind of how I help people work with psychedelics. Hopefully the day will come where, you know, people like me won't even be needed, because you can go to your doctor and get the same kind of treatment. So with that, I'll leave it there, and stay tuned for the next video, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.